History Things podcast, a conversational approach to discussing social, industrial, maritime, music, and military history. Join us and our special guests as we dive down the rabbit holes of your favorite stories from the past. Follow the History Things podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or online at Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be sure to leave a review and a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. Pat and Parker are coming right up. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy the show.
Here's the pitch.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the History Things podcast. I'm your host, Pat McGuire. As you can hear, it is an early year recording, which means the annual plague has descended upon the house, so you're getting the Frogman today. Due apologies to everyone out there joining me for this early spring training classic that is going to be today's episode. Is my co-host, as always, ladies and gentlemen, Parker Russell, broadcasting from his early season site, Grapefruit League, we could say. Parker, do you even know what that means when I say the Grapefruit League?
I'm assuming it has something to do with baseball.
All right, well, before we even get into your baseball prowess, let's introduce our guest today, returning to the show for the first time in a little more than a season here. You know him from the epic Vicksburg story that we got to tell. A huge baseball fan in his own right, back today to talk to us about some of the early history of baseball. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Miller. Andrew Miller, welcome back to the podcast. How are you, big guy?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me again here and talking about something that isn't necessarily my total wheelhouse, but I'm a passionate person about it, so it's going to be exciting.
I will tell you that if we go back, I should have pulled the audio clip. If we go back to the Vicksburg episode, you strongly stood on the let's talk baseball.
Right, absolutely. I mean, it's
Seem to remember that.
We could spend an entire episode talking about baseball, the Civil War, its direct links, and we'll touch a little bit about that in this episode for sure.
Ooh, I'm touching the wrong buttons here. I don't even know how to work my own board
You need
anymore.
a producer, Pat.
Let's get started with this, right? So baseball, very special subject. Our listeners just listened to about an hour conversation with Tim Kurkjian, Baseball Hall of Fame writer, ESPN analyst, legend if you're a baseball geek. You know who he is, Andrew?
Legend, man. The guy's amazing. I don't get, the whole freaked out when you see somebody, but I saw him at Fenway Park giving an interview, and I heard that he was approachable, and I didn't have the gumption or whatever you want to call it to even walk up to him, because I was like, that's Tim Kurkjian, man. What am I going to say to him?
Dude, I didn't have the gumption either. My wife had to facilitate him coming on the show because we have a personal connection. I couldn't even ask him myself, so I understand the starstruck.
He's such just a gentleman, and it was just such a treasure, just such a pleasure talking to him, and just a great guy.
Great guy. All right, so look, man, before we get into today's topic, baseball is a super meaningful subject to me. It's a super meaningful game, something that connects me to my family, to the past, a lot of things. Let's start with just some ways that baseball is meaningful to you guys. I'm going to toss it to our guest today, Andrew, first. Andrew, you put your win behind the sails of the Detroit Tigers. When we talked Vicksburg, I can see you wearing the jersey now. I got my Yankee hat on. Parker's repping the Nats. So baseball has been in your life for a long time. Tell our listeners just, what is it about baseball that's special to you? Maybe a story, something about that. And how do you end up a Tigers fan?
Yeah, it's a great question. I grew up about a little over an hour north of New York City, of all places. So I should in right be a Yankees or a Mets fan. And deep in my heart, I do enjoy going to the Mets, so I'm sorry, Pat, for that.
Wow.
But,
wow.
I'm going to share my story, one of my favorite baseball stories in a little bit, but baseball is like one of the earliest sports memories I can think of. Probably it's got to be the late 80s, and I remember the devastating loss, the Detroit Tigers against the Minnesota Twins to go to the playoffs, and they had pulled off a rock star trade for Doyle Alexander, and they had traded a prospect, John Smoltz, to the Atlanta Braves. Who knew?
Oh, man.
Took the Tigers, they lost to the Twins, and the rest is history as far as that's concerned. But my grandfather was he played 4 different sports in high school. He was just the total jock of the early 1950s, and instilled that passion in first baseball and then sports in general. He's inducted into the Michigan Hall of Fame. He was a teacher for 35 years at Rochester, Michigan High School. He's really the cornerstone. My father also fueled that a little bit. We would get tickets to minor league games, the Hudson Valley Renegades. We'd go down and go to Yankee Stadium, old Yankee Stadium.
The real Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time, but to get back to how do you become a Tigers fan if you live in New York? My entire family's from the state of Michigan. My father's family are all from Detroit. I grew up with stories of my grandfather collecting Coke bottles to get nickels to get tickets to go into Briggs Stadium, and if they couldn't get tickets, they'd sneak in, the broken wooden fence and watch the games of the Tigers in their heydays of the 1940s with Hank Greenberg, and watching the replays of those games on YouTube or anything with my grandfather, who's now passed away. Baseball instills in your heart something special that brings all these different moments in your life from little kid to now, and the special people you shared it with, and you'll always have that. Always have it. In fact, I should have brought it. I have a coffee mug of my grandfather and me standing in front of Comerica Park, and it's now one of my treasured possessions. I don't want to drink coffee out of it because it's just a picture of him and I on it. That's all it is. And
fire in the house, the family goes, and then you go back for the mug.
Dude, pretty much. I mean, it's like a couple Civil War items that I know are one of a kind, the mug, and people on my shoulder running out of the house, man. I mean,
I hear you.
Bottom line. But yeah, that's the real reason. And when it's like any other team sport, when you put your heart into it, it doesn't matter how bad they are. It doesn't matter how long, you suffer. You just are to the end.
Andrew, as a Tigers fan, you have endured in your lifetime some bruising moments.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to go most bruising to me, and it didn't even happen to me. I'm not a fan of the Tigers, but I mean, I still ache for Armando Galarraga, deeply, deeply ache for him. And, that's obviously a perfect game, right? Like, forget what Cooperstown says. That is a perfect game.
Yeah. And again, for listeners, a perfect game is a pitcher, 27 outs, no hits. I mean, it's perfect. And this particular individual, Armando Galarraga, was not a star-studded pitcher. He was a workhorse. He went out there. He lost a lot of games for the Tigers. I mean, he was pretty much an average pitcher, but on that day, he was perfect. And because of the human error of the game, which is important, and we see it all the time, he was denied his moment, and it was tragic. It was. And I will, if any of my buddies at that time period that I was sharing an apartment will remember, one was coming home from their job and knew that this was happening and was so excited and was walking up the sidewalk and watched a box fan thrown out of a window. And he says, that's when I knew that something bad had happened. Yeah.
Parker, do you know what we're talking about? It's okay if you don't, because I'll tell a quick story.
Yeah, please.
So basically, this guy that Andrew's talking about gets the ground ball that he wants. It gets tossed to first base. It's a close play. It's going to be the final play of this perfect game, but the play is completed. It is very clearly an out. And Jim Joyce, the umpire, calls him safe.
Ground ball, right side. Cabrera will cut it off. Galarraga covers. He's out. No, he's safe. He is safe. He is safe at first base. And here comes Jim Leyland. Oh, my goodness. said he was safe at first base. You make the call. Cabrera, Galarraga.
Did he miss the base? He's out. Why is he safe?
He must have missed the base.
Are you kidding me? Why is he safe?
We'll see right here.
Why is he safe? Oh my goodness, Jim Joyce, no!
Jeez Louise.
Oh my goodness.
What a travesty.
And this is before replay is the big part of baseball like it is now and things like that. And there was, I don't agree with it, but there was, quote, nothing that could be done. And it was ruled a hit and it spoiled the perfect game. And I'll tell you what was insane was looking at both lineups. I mean, going over, I don't even remember who the Tigers were playing. You probably do, but both teams on the field were just like completely mystified by what was happening in that moment. Like it wasn't right.
Yeah,
Wow.
I think and I think the player that hit it was I think it was Jason McDonald. When he was called safe, this is how you understand that you're a part of history. When he was called safe, I think he legged it out. He knew he was out.
Great hustle play, but he was out.
He put his hands on his head because he knew. And the thing that I always look back, you watch these replays all the time. I think everybody at this point, no matter what fan of any baseball team you are, people do look at that now and be like, man, Armando Galarraga had such grace at that moment that he looked, he smiled, he went back to the mound, he got
He got the out. He got the next out.
and that was it. And it was just another game because that's the job, right? He never freaked out. People freaked out. I mean, they were very visibly upset. I mean, Jim Leland, probably smoked 15 cigarettes in the dugout after that.
100%.
So anyway, there's been a lot. And I was born in 1985, so I wasn't even for a month or a year or anything for the last time the Tigers won a World Series. So we're still waiting with bated breath.
You might be waiting a while, friend. We won't talk modern baseball too much, but the Tigers might be a few years away, so to speak.
Yeah, hey, that's the way it goes.
That's the way it goes. Parker, baseball is special to you. I know more recently in life. I know you didn't grow up super attached to the game, but having a family of your own, you and I have had many chats about cool things that you've experienced via the game of baseball. Tell our listeners a little bit about why baseball's special to you and like something that you've done that's meaningful relative to the game.
Well, I think like when I was a kid, my first memory really of baseball, because we didn't really follow baseball in the house at all. We weren't really a big sports family, but we followed. But of course, we had the news on, and the first thing that really sticks out in my head, my first baseball memory, goes back to that tragic earthquake in Oakland.
Flash forward to the bottom of the fourth inning. Dave Parker barely by inches just misses a home run. Candy Maldonado with the hesitation, allowing Jose Canseco to score, and he fails to get Dave Parker at second base, so the Oakland A's take.
I'll tell you what, we're having an earth. Well, I don't know if we're on the air. We are in commercial, I guess.
We interrupt our regular program scheduled to bring you a special report from ABC News.
Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel. Let me try and explain to you what must already be obvious to the millions of you who tuned in to watch the World Series tonight. Take a look at that live picture. That is from San Francisco. That fire presumably has been caused by an earthquake that knocked both the network broadcast of the World Series off the air and has been causing apparently some considerable damage in the San Francisco Bay Area.
And that was the first time baseball really made an impact on my life. Of course, I was on the other side of the country, but I think that was 1989, right?
Yeah.
I was gonna say I don't even think I was 10 years old yet, and I remember seeing those images. It was the first time I remember being, not the first time because I'd seen the shuttle, I'd seen the space shuttle explode, but watching the it was rough. The 80s were really rough on the old newsreels there. Didn't really give you any content warning. They were just like, hey, by the way. But no, watching those images from Oakland with the bridge collapse on it, and then of course, you see the video of the game taking place, and they're like, wait a minute, here we got a problem, you know.
Al
Um,
Michaels, man, I don't remember it live, but like, as a baseball fan, like, that's one of those things that just gets ingrained in the file of your baseball brain. Al Michaels calling
Right.
that moment.
Great
Right.
30 for 30.
All right, so for me, real fast, I grew up a Yankee fan. I won't dwell because I know that nobody cares what Yankee fans think, but I had a very silver spoon youth. I was 10, they won the World Series, and then they went on and won four more of them throughout the next part of my life. Played in a few others and lost them, so I got to see the Yankees, do some incredible things. But I will tell you I guess one baseball memory that sticks with me, aside from like my own personal playing memories and things like that, was in the 2001 World Series, one of the World Series that the Yankees did not win. In fact, that was the famous Luis Gonzalez bloop, right over second base to give the Diamondbacks their first title. But we were up in New York just after 9/11 for my great-grandfather's funeral, and it was about October, late October. I don't think the calendar had flipped over, but I remember that we were driving back from one of the family function things, and it was late, and we were listening to the game on the radio, and we were sitting there in Long Island at some random intersection when Scott Brocious hit this dinger.
The potential tying run at the plate. There are two down. The Diamondbacks trying to shut out the Yankees, who were shut out only 5 times during the regular season. That one hit in the air to left field. Do you believe it? Goodbye, home run. They have done it again. This game is tied.
And I remember there's 40 cars at this intersection, and everybody's just laying on their horns. People are hanging out their windows, and it was just like this moment. And for me, it's special because like my family is grieving twice because we're a New York-based family. And like the country, everybody is still just completely hammered by what had happened on September 11th. And then, we lost the guy that started my family, my great-grandfather. And so we were up there saying goodbye to him. So it was a very heavy moment. And then Scott Brocious literally lifted the fan base, lifted this team, lifted my family. And I'll never forget that. But to get to these moments in the modern era, right, these post-steroid era moments, these things that are special to us that we live through. Baseball has had to go through a very long journey, and while it has changed tremendously, baseball still, I think one of the things that's special about the game to me is that it still looks very much like it did yesterday. And when I mean yesterday, I mean 100 years ago. 150 years ago, things like that. So Andrew Miller has joined us today to talk about the dead ball era specifically, one of those eras of yesterday baseball that kind of doesn't get thought about unless you're thinking about Babe Ruth.
Right.
Ty Cobb, we'll give you that one. Things like that. But there's so much more than just those big names. So, Andrew, are you ready to go back to the dead ball era and get us started?
Yep.
All right, let's go back to, let's take ourselves out to the game here.
Out to the ball game, take me out with the crowd. Oh, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
Andrew, that recording is done in 1908, so that is a true dead ball era recording.
No doubt.
That's the Hayden Quartet. I went and found that just for you.
That's pretty cool. It'd be neat to have that on like a 78 or something like that, or like a Edison wax wheel or something crazy like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, that'd be great.
That'd be really rad. All right, Andrew, take it away, man. Take us to the dead ball. When we talk about early history of baseball, where do you get the story started?
Baseball is an interesting sport because there's controversy from the minute it's created in the American version of baseball, and I think that controversy is really the thing that begins to define the early dead ball era and this basically 20-year period, 2 decades of grit and determination and the first real major stars that people started buying, the first baseball cards, you name it. So many different things happen. But yeah, the dead ball era really begins at the turn of the 20th century. Literally, it's considered basically 1900 to 1920 is its longevity, and they call it the dead ball era, specifically because of the type of baseball that was used per se. And that ball was softer than the baseball that we've probably all felt. Everybody, I think, can at least relate to the tactileness of holding the baseball and feeling the stitches and trying to figure out how these guys are throwing these nasty fastballs and curves and things like that. And the dead ball was fundamentally different. It was softer. The rules were different in the game, so you could basically do whatever you wanted to it. You could manipulate it in any way that you wanted to, including, disgusting stuff like spitting on it, getting a file out and filing different sides to get different breaks on it, nasty stuff. There was no rules. And really the game was based on strategy and small ball and smart ball. And not to fast forward to the end of the dead ball era, but some of those things really go away and eventually will come back as people start looking at the game more strategically. But for the stars of this time period and the people that are coming up, you had to be a nasty pitcher with crazy breaking stuff and outstanding fastballs. There's done the tests on, and there's another ESPN thing you can watch, Fastball, where they try to figure out who had the fastest fastball ever. And I can't remember if it's like Bob Feller and Nolan Ryan had like the fastest fastball, but some of the dead ball pitchers are the ones that are put up to the Pepsi Challenge, and they're right there throwing this softer ball that apparently, every time it got hit would get more and more out of whack. And you didn't really switch the balls up. For our listeners, if you've watched, even if you don't care about baseball, turn on one inning and count how many baseballs a pitcher will use.
Oh my goodness. As a catcher, I grew up as a catcher. Asking for baseballs was my thing.
Right. Dozens. At that, the average dead ball era game, which could last anywhere between the 9 typical innings and 15 and 20, wow. They have 1, 2, 3 actual baseballs that they used. Again, the stadiums that they were playing in were fundamentally different. Open grounds, home runs as we know them are, we just talked about Scott Brocious hitting a dinger. For those of you that don't know what a dinger, that's a home run. That's lifting a ball out of the field and into the bleachers, or if you're, Cecil Fielder, over Tiger Stadium, etc. Anybody hitting a baseball out of a physical field of play. Dead ball, they have home runs. It's essentially legging them out as in the parks, running the bases till you get home, hitting all 4 bases. So the game is just different. And it really begins with the creation of the modern major leagues. The National League, which has its origins in the 1870s, 1880s, as it's feeling itself out, is competing with a variety of other different leagues as baseball is taken off in the post-Civil War era. We owe a debt of gratitude to the Civil War for expanding the interest of baseball, and the veterans of the American Civil War, some of which have a very important place in not only propelling baseball into Americans' consciousness and fundamentally becoming the America's pastime through a variety of different sports memorabilia owners that wanted this to become a thing to make money. But those veterans will still be around at the turn of the century when the dead ball era starts, and they have some major influence on our collective memories of baseball in general. But the early game itself is just defined by smart ball, and that's kind of where we go. Now, before we really get into the game, let's talk about sort of call it seeking an American hero. And this is kind of the interesting thing because we're thinking about nationalism in the United States in the turn of the 20th century. That President Theodore Roosevelt is an influential figure, and before he became the vice president of the United States, before he was a soldier in the Spanish-American War, before he was the assistant secretary to the Navy, he was involved in New York politics, and anything New York related, including baseball, he had an avid interest in, and he one night spent a time with, I think, around 400 people at Delmonico's restaurant in New York City, in Manhattan. And if those that are familiar with Delmonico's or steaks, and I mean, that was the place to have a good dinner, and you had to know somebody to get into Delmonico's. It was for the elites of New York, and they had something, I believe, called the Patriarchs Meeting of the most influential people. And among the topics of conversation was baseball and its origins. And it was controversial because many people still were considering that baseball wasn't truly an American pastime, which had kind of become the thing that people really were propelling in the United States, and the sports teams and things were propelling. But people were kind of alluding to the fact that this game was adapted from something called rounders, which apparently, if for my Tudor historians, had been around since that era in England, but could be traced back to, I believe, the 1740s. And it was the first time it was published. So this game of rounders on a diamond with bases, two teams pitching a ball, running, etc. And so this new era of baseball starts kind of taking off. And in the 1880s, they were talking about, hey, this is fundamentally an American game. And of course, they're all like, hurrah. But that kind of 1880 dinner at Delmonico's sparked this almost 20-year period to try to figure out the origins of baseball in a way that would not only solidify that baseball is American, but also enable sports owners and, again, the Spaldings and et cetera that want to sell baseballs and bats and baseball cards and all the stuff that they want fans to buy. They want to back it up with something really unique.
Andrew, at this time, is Abner Doubleday a big part of this conversation?
That would be 100% correct. But unfortunately, at the time period where this thing starts to really kick off, Abner Doubleday is no longer living. So convenient? I think so. I think the bottom line for this, and we'll link in Abner Doubleday in the Civil War, is Albert Spalding, who was involved in baseball himself. He had been a young pitcher. He is incredibly influential in the early 20th century. And he gets a buddy of his, a former Civil War veteran named Abraham G. Mills. And Abraham G. Mills, who had been a part-time owner of the National League in Baseball, or president, of the National League of Baseball. And he had really kind of propelled the game in the late 1800s. Mills is selected to put together a commission to solidify that this is an American game. Mills had been a veteran of the Civil War. I believe he was in the 165th New York. He was a Zouave, and he had fought in some of the most horrific battles of the American Civil War towards the end of it. I think he gets out as an officer. Don't quote me, didn't research Mills' military career, and that's not what we're here to talk about. But the bottom line is he is a Civil War veteran, and that, for any time period in the late 1800s and late 1800s, early 1900s, is always going to be influential for what people do. Is, hey, if you're a Civil War veteran, especially a Union Civil War veteran, that's going to carry some weight. But Mills is selected to head this commission, and the bottom line is, in 1905, this commission needs to have prominent men to solidify that baseball is American. And this is, again, what's going to kick off the dead ball era. What they come up with is they decide to solicit across the United States, get letters from anybody that knew anything about the potential origins of the game in the United States, and with the rules and everything. And I mean, far and wide, from Maine to California, they're looking to get anybody that knows anything. And they receive a letter from an individual named, I believe, Abram Graves is his name, and he was an old mining engineer from Denver, Colorado, and he sends this letter that says that he grew up in Cooperstown, New York, and that he was there in, I believe, 1838 or 1839 when Abner Doubleday, another local youth, and him and several of their playmates from the local academy, the Otsego Academy there, went and created baseball in Cooperstown, New York, and that's the origin of baseball. And of course, for the listeners that may or may not know this, but Pat knows this, and Parker may know this, but Abner Doubleday becomes, one, he's a graduate of the military academy at West Point, New York, 1842
Right.
graduate. He is a Mexican-American War veteran.
Sure
And because
is.
he's a Mexican-American War veteran, he continues to serve in a variety of different garrison duties, including ending up at Fort Moultrie and Fort Sumter at the kickoff of the American Civil War. So he is now a focal figure at the beginning of the American Civil War, which is this cornerstone moment in the United States that everybody now is looking back with reverence and awe.
I always
He was
forget
there-
that Abner Doubleday is with Major Anderson at Sumter.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And
So-
he's second in command. So
Yeah.
he's not only there, he's the one that fires the first cannon, or sights the first cannon, fires it. He's second in command. But because of his experience at Fort Sumter, and because he's a West Point grad, he is very quickly promoted through the ranks as a brigadier general, major general. He fights with the Army of the Potomac from the peninsula through Bronner's Farm, Second Manassas, Antietam, Fredericksburg,
Nice.
Bill, and of course, for what most people know, the name Doubleday would be July 1st at Gettysburg. And, you know, for our listeners who may or may not like the Civil War, Gettysburg is it, right? You don't have to know anything about the Civil War to know Gettysburg.
Big deal.
Doubleday?
Big
Yeah,
deal.
it's a big deal.
Oh,
Big deal.
baseball? Yeah. I mean,
Right.
even
So-
50, 60 years after the Civil War is over, those names are about as American as apple pie, right? And so now you have this central figure who is no longer living at the turn of the 20th century, and somebody wrote a letter stating that this guy created baseball, and that guy was there, and nobody investigates the veracity of this claim. Nobody, they take it all at face value, going, because Spalding, who set up Mills and the commission, were like, bingo, that's what we wanted.
Right.
That's all we needed was this
That's all we needed.
guy.
So can I ask a question? Can I
Yeah.
pop in? I'm wondering, because whenever I hear about baseball in the Civil War, I hear about it from usually a Union perspective. I'm assuming because it was invented in New York. Is this something that was popular in the Confederacy too, or was this something that was pretty much more of a Union thing than a Confederate thing?
No, that it's a good question, and no, there's a lot of evidence that soldiers on both sides were acquiring baseballs and bats. I got a good
Nice.
Confederate one that I can do off the top of my head. Soldiers that were captured in North Carolina in 1861 and at Fort Pulaski in early 1862 ended up in New York Harbor, at Fort Columbus, and Castle Williams on
Mhm.
Governor's Island. And in fact, they actually had been at Fort Wood, which is the base of the Statue of Liberty. They were there first, but then they crossed
Wow.
the Upper Bay Harbor and they went on to Governor's Island. There were so many people that were from Savannah, Georgia, and in North Carolina that had family living in New York, that their family members started sending them gifts and food and clothes and all this stuff. So these prisoners were eking it out in the wintertime in New York. It's awful. But they get baseballs and bats and rules of the game in 1862, and these guys are playing in the springtime on Governor's Island playing baseball, just because it was already a known sport in the country. It was already becoming popular, and these Confederate prisoners are, for exercise, are literally going out and playing to leg it out to stay healthy. Which is why, as young kids, you're told to pick up a bat and a ball and go run outside, because it's all about health and it's all about keeping your kids active. As a parent, about getting your kids outside so that you have some peace and civility and all that other stuff. And what better way?
Got it.
You know, all that good
That's
stuff.
right.
But no, there's ample evidence, and there's tons of people I could probably produce more, but there's tons of baseball disseminating through the ranks of both armies. And then, of course, because of that, it is looked upon that this becomes America's pastime because of the reconciliation between the sides. One of the first things that people can point to as a movement of reconciliation between the North and South is baseball games, because the competition between soldiers that once tried to kill each other is now on the base paths, and they are physically, teams from Cincinnati are coming to Louisville, and teams from New York are going to Richmond. And that stuff starts happening in the 1860s and 1870s.
It's pretty wild, Andrew. It's pretty wild how often sports move from, or rivalries rather, move from the physical manifestations of violence and death to sporting. So as soon as you started talking about this, I immediately started thinking college football, and I started thinking about the Toledo War, how that basically became the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry.
True.
It's like that is a, Kevin Day floating on cloud nine right now, national champion, but he can't beat Michigan, right? But like,
I don't think he cares.
I mean, but that's a big deal, because if he doesn't win the national championship, that rivalry is such a big deal, because at one point there was that bloodless war fought over Toledo of all places.
Yeah.
But there it is. There's a sports rivalry now.
Yeah, it's one of the best sports rivalries, and probably number one. I mean, it's all about who you talk to. But all that to say that the Civil War is going to have a direct impact just because of the influence of names and individuals and places. So now you have Doubleday, you have Cooperstown, you have Gettysburg, and you have an officer that had a prestigious military career and is now gone. And Americans are starting to feel that on a very personal level, because the Doubledays are gone, the Grants are gone, the heroes of the Union that not only preserved the country but has progressed the country, they're now dying. And from a personal perspective, our dads are dying, our grandfathers are dying that fought in that war, and we're starting to see the impact. So at this time period in 1905, the Mills Commission, hits a grand slam. Not to have a pun, but they literally knock it out of the park, and people are like, yes. And that propels that myth for a very long time, to the point where I guess I should say that I have eaten many $1 hot dogs and washed them down with many $1 beers at the Auburn Doubledays Falcon Park as part of the New York Penn League. So a little shout out to them and upstate New York baseball. But there you go. I mean, you have minor league teams. You have the field at Cooperstown at the Hall of Fame named after Doubleday. Things that I'm not going to say persist that myth. I think most people understand now that was clearly not true, and if they don't, now they do.
If you've been listening to the History Things podcast, I have peppered in probably about 1,000 times now that Doubleday did not invent baseball. And I'll be gentle about it in this episode, because we're actually having a substantive conversation. But we were talking Antietam in like season 1, and then again in like season 4, and Doubleday comes up, and I'm like, and by the way, for the record, he didn't invent it. Helped the game, but didn't invent it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's important for us to have, we wanted to put our heroes on pedestals, and they did it very well with Doubleday as another individual. I think, it's one of those things like, what would Doubleday have thought? I think he would have thought it was ludicrous, because he's like, well, it's not true. And I had this military career, and I served my country, and I did great things, but I'm probably only going to be known for this.
Right.
So there's irony in it, but you're right. It really does have an immense impact on how we remember baseball, and also potentially like the Hollywood influence of dead ball era, and how do we link these stories into individuals we'll talk about with, you know, some of the cinematic things that we've experienced growing up, and you know, from Field of Dreams.
Eight Men Out.
I mean, 8 Men Out is the dead ball era movie, and I want to hold that one off because
okay.
we have to end the dead ball era with that story, so we won't get into that. But I will say that Field of Dreams also talks about the same story, so I won't hit that. But Field of Dreams came out in the late 1980s. It had followed the success of Bull Durham, another baseball movie, both starring Kevin Costner as a
my
star.
favorite, Bull Durham. I watched it today. That is my favorite baseball movie of all time.
It's so good, and it's so relatable. But then, you know, there's other movies like Cobb with Tommy Lee Jones, and if you've ever seen that, it's really not a great movie. And we'll talk more about Cobb as an individual, and Charlie Learson's book that he wrote recently, or fairly recently, that blows up all the myths of Cobb and all the things that were said over time. But there's other things like The Natural and Mr. Baseball and Moneyball and 61 and 42 about Jackie Robinson. 61 is Pat's thing about
Mantle and Maris.
And Mickey Mantle going after Babe Ruth's record, but you know, The Sandlot. As kids, everybody's watched The Sandlot. If you're from our generation, it's just one of those feel good movies that, like, you can turn it on and it's all wrapped around baseball. But even in that movie, you have James. For those, I'm sorry, I'm ruining the plot of Sandlot. But
spoilers, 35 years later.
Yeah,
right.
35.
James Jones was a Negro League baseball player, one of the best, and he got blinded in a game. He knew all the greats of the dead ball era. I mean, he's got pictures that he's showing of Ruth. Of course, they're probably later on, you know. And
I'm glad you brought up the Negro Leagues. I know the Negro Leagues. The focus on the big era of the Negro Leagues comes later, after the dead ball era, kind of between the dead ball era and the World War II era. But in the aftermath of the American Civil War, with things like the 13th Amendment and the slow enfranchisement of people, do we have precursors to what we now officially call the Negro Leagues? Do we have African American baseball happening separately from things like the National League, or does that still take a longer time to develop, I guess, socially?
I think one, the teams of the 1880s and 1890s were integrating indigenous Americans and African Americans into teams, but there was a lot of racism too, mainly with owners, but there was a lot of racism amongst the players in the leagues. And you know, those players that did get to play, it was for a season or two, and then they were ultimately kicked out. I think the first baseball league for African Americans is the 1880s, but again, I think it fails. I think there's another formation of a Negro League in 1920. And I think that may be the Negro League that we look. I can't remember. I know the Negro Leagues are kind of over, but I can't remember exactly when it starts. Like 1933. I mean, we're
going to do a big episode on the Negro Leagues and our continuing baseball conversation. So I don't want to get too far into it, but it just was something that was in my mind, because it's like you don't. This is why I like baseball, and obviously James Earl Jones very succinctly puts this into a monologue in Field of Dreams, but he talks about the passage of time and the things you can mark in our nation through the game of baseball. And at this moment where baseball is becoming what we recognize it as, you know, there are people that are becoming a part of society in a way they have never before, right? You know, if you're talking the National League's founding in the 1870s, emancipation is less than 20 years old, you know, or right about 20 years old, depending on when we're talking about in the 70s, things like that. So when we get to the conversation we're having now, where, you know, this commission around 1905 is, you know, come together, we're not too much further into that conversation. The National League is only about 30-ish years old. I mean, hell, the American League folding in and becoming the Major League Baseball that we know, that's only 2 years old by about 1905, right? Because I think the American League goes from was it like an independent minor league system to the Major American League in like 1903 or something like that. So this is all happening quickly.
01. Yep.
01.
Yep. 01. And then you're right. They don't consider it, I think, until 03 is when that we have the two defined leagues that we would consider today. Yeah, absolutely.
So with this era, and it's starting with this need to stand on the shoulders of the nationalism movement, which I will not touch in 2025. But just, this game is starting in a very interesting place. It's like, I recognize this is something special, but everybody knows, like, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, that it's not ours, but now we're going to make it ours. Like, baseball is going to become this, like, when we say things that make America, like, what is America? Apple pie, mom, and baseball, right? Like, this is the moment that is starting.
Yeah, this, again, the true stars are what we think of at this time period. 1905, you get a 19-year-old rookie that's picked up from Georgia named Tyrus Raymond Cobb, who arguably is the greatest baseball player ever lived. That's not just a Detroit Tigers fan. It's the things that he was able to accomplish and the records that he established that had to eventually be broken, and many of them have been. But he did it all at a time period. He was also a player's coach, which is something you don't really see, or you don't see today. But was very popular in the dead ball era, where you would get a player that would get experience, and eventually the owners would make them a player's coach, so they'd be out there, in center field, but they were the coach of the team. Crazy stuff like that.
This was an era of crazy things, because these were guys that were like coaches, players, and also auto mechanics on Saturday.
Pretty much, yeah. And I think the interesting thing, so the average experience of a dead, I would just say the average person of the dead ball era playing baseball is unique. And I try to always point people towards books and movies and references to give them the gist. And I would say that of any baseball book that I've ever picked up, probably The Glory of Their Times has got to be top 3. It may be the greatest. And Lawrence Ritter is the author. I think the first edition came out either in the late 50s or early 60s. And he made a point to go find the remaining great dead ball era players. And he just interviewed them. The book, there's no fluff. It is the words of the people as they said it. He just recorded them and put what they said about the game. And you have such a unique cast of characters. You could call them, I don't want to call them clowns, but there's so many ludicrous things happening at this time period that it was both a professional sport with a bunch of, undereducated drunks and degenerates and things. And then,
what, am I a clown to you?
Yeah.
Well, dude, Andrew, what we're talking about, what you're talking about right now, Andrew, hold on. I want to just tell you this quick story, because one of my favorite things to do at my job is when my boss and I get a downtime, we are both big fans of baseball. And so obscure baseball facts, obscure baseball stories. And he and I have both ended up on a few Instagram accounts that just chronicle wild stuff that happened back in this era. And our favorite story to tell, it's a tragic one, but it's the one where this, I forget what he does for a living, but he's basically like I'd made the joke, he was like an auto mechanic who was also a professional baller or whatever, chases down a fly ball in right field, goes foul, catches the ball, gets hit by a train, dies, doesn't drop the ball. Dude's out. But it's like they recorded it as both like the final out of the game and this guy's dead. But it's like, and then like literally like the next day they were like, all right, we got to replace him in the lineup. And they just went about and played it. And I was like, dude, if I watched my right fielder get smoked by a train, I don't think we'd be playing tomorrow, But there they were.
To be honest, that's that's a good personification of the things that are happening in the time period. Baseball traveled in trains generally. They got into fights a lot. I did want to make a caveat because I was saying how they're degenerates and drunkards and uneducated. You have those guys, and then you have this mix of college educated ball players that Harry Hooper, who was a great dead ball era player, he made an emphasis in what he wanted to tell Lawrence Ritter, which was effectively like, everybody thinks we're a bunch of bums. Everybody thought we were drunks and bums, and we stepped out on our wives, and we weren't Christians. And he is lambasting all of this stuff to say, he starts listing player after player, a Harvard grad, a Yale grad, Gettysburg College with Eddie Plank. There's the Gettysburg pull of the night. Doubleday and Gettysburg Eddie Plank. I think it's Eddie Plank.
Yeah, it is, because anytime I go to Gettysburg, I end up eating at Gettysburg Eddie's.
Yep,
Gettysburg Eddie's.
And everybody in Gettysburg will know this, and I again don't want to pretend like I know more than that. But I will say that the greatest dead ball era hitters, Ty Cobb and Joe Jackson and Wahoo Sam Crawford and Honus Wagner and all these guys all put Eddie Plank at the top of the greatest pitcher that they had to hit with the nastiest stuff. That's not to say that he was, but they said that on a day that they could face any pitcher, he would be the one they wouldn't want to face. And that
says a lot. Says a lot, dude.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and he was a hometown guy, Gettysburg guy, comes back after his career. And, there's a lot of guys like that are small town. America is still at this time period very rural, very small town. We're thinking all these dead ball areas. Oh man, they're all from the cities, Boston and New York and Baltimore and gritty, and they were, some of them, but many more of them are from Nebraska and Dakotas and the Midwest, and they come from these small places, and somehow baseball pulled them out of there. They were like, well, I was destined to be a farmer, or I was going to be an engineer working on the rail line, but they had a ball club, and I decided to, I started pitching, and I was really good that season. And then a guy saw me, and he told me to go talk to John McGraw because he knew him. And then I ended up playing for the Giants for 10 years, and I never was an engineer ever again. These stories are like, what?
They're everywhere. These stories are everywhere.
They're nuts. So at this time period, you get, what they would consider the first five-tool player, and that was Johannes Wagner. Honus Wagner, I mean, I'm trying to remember what his baseball card went. I think he's got the most expensive, tobacco baseball card ever auctioned off. I can't remember how much it went for, but
millions.
Unreal. They called them the Flying Dutchman, which, whether that's derogatory or not, we also have to remember that German Americans, before the Civil War, were called Dutchmen in a very derogatory way. Post-Civil War, I think the reputation of Germans was propelled, if they fought for the Union Army, enabled them to kind of climb out of that a little bit. But when we come around the First World War, that starts to change again, and many German-speaking people stop speaking German, strictly speak English, even broken English, and certainly Wagner was derided at that time period. I don't think he played baseball throughout the whole First World War, the Great War. I think he was done in 17 or 18. But that being said, for the heyday of dead ball era, I mean, he was the five-tool player. He had a career hitting average of like 328, almost 3,500 hits. I mean, the guy was a monster. Tons of home runs for his era.
I mean, in 2025, they still consider him potentially the greatest shortstop that ever played the game.
No doubt. Yeah. Played for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So for all those Pittsburgh, Rich Condon and all the people in the Civil War world that are from Pittsburgh, that's your guy. He's
more sad baseball fans, Pittsburgh Pirate fans.
It went Honus Wagner, Roberto Clemente, and then Jim Leland smoking cigarettes in the dugout. That's what you got. You got that. No, he was a phenomenal player, and he got to play in the World Series in 1909 against the Detroit Tigers. The Tigers, conversely, were also the team of that era as well. They had a phenomenal roster of players, and they had two stud hitters. They had, again, Sam Crawford, who was from Nebraska. He was from Wahoo, Nebraska. Had started his career in baseball in 1899. So he was already a star by the time that Cobb came up as a rookie. And when people started talking about Tyrus Cobb's aloof behavior or his anger or this, there's a reason. We'll talk a little bit about it in a second. But Sam Crawford was already in center field. I think he moved over into right field. And now you have these two phenomenal hitters hitting, I think one season Crawford hit like 376 and Cobb hit like 428 or something like that. I mean, it was ridiculous. These guys crushing it. And in 1907, they win the pennant. They go to the first World Series. They lose. They go back in 1908. They lose. They come back in 1909, and here's Honus Wagner and the Pittsburgh Pirates. And they're going to try. The Tigers are going to try to take it, and Cobb's trying to win his first World Series, and he loses again. They were the first team to ever go back to back World Series and lose. So there's one of my first sad plugs for the Detroit Tigers.
Oh man, they've been doing that for a century
of the dead ball era, and they just got beat out by better teams, and Pittsburgh couldn't have done it without Wagner and being as good as he was. But yeah, an unbelievable player. Again, a World Series champion, a batting champion. I mean, you name it. He's got his obvious. I don't think this needs to be said, but his number's retired. He wore 33, I believe, and his number's retired, and of course a Hall of Famer. First group of guys that got into the Hall of Fame, and Wagner was one of them. So you with if you want to call Wagner the hero of the 19 teens for baseball in the dead ball era, then people would say, well, who was the villain? And historical memory would tell us who's the villain of that era.
It's Ty Cobb.
Ty Cobb, right?
Well, before we get into Ty Cobb, I got to make an honorable mention if we're not going to talk about him directly, because I grew up, I'm from Montgomery County, Maryland, which is, right on the outside of D.C. So, our dead ball guy is the Big Train.
Right.
I mean, that's Walter Johnson. Now, is he a true dead ball era player, or does he come around closer to the end of it?
Well, the first thing I would say about Walter Johnson is he is considered the greatest pitcher of the dead ball era and one of the greatest pitchers of all time. He's a Kansas guy, but he has over 400 wins. I think now I'm going to Tim Kirkchin, please don't listen to this.
Especially because he went to Walter Johnson High School. He's a huge WJ guy. Right. I mean, I grew up playing Rockville Baseball Association, and we played on Big Train Field.
Yeah. He's gonna go, but no. Walter Johnson, I think, is second only to Cy Young for wins and things like that, and the Cy Young Award. He also played very early on in the dead ball era, but he was done by that point. Walter Johnson had some of the nastiest stuff, and again, he had, I'm trying to remember how many complete games he had.
And he was a huge dude. I mean, he's a huge dude throwing smoke.
3,500 strikeouts. I mean, the guy was an animal. And I think, and I'm trying to remember, I think because Nolan Ryan's got a lot of those records where he's close for strikeouts, but I think Walter Johnson has one more, he's got 11 or 12 and Ryan's got 10 or 11. I think it's 12 for Johnson and 11 for Nolan Ryan. So, not to segue back between dead ball and modern baseball, but here's names that you could probably recognize: Nolan Ryan or Randy Johnson or some of these flamethrowers that we think about when we think about baseball in our collective memories, and the players we saw play. And Ryan, I saw play, at the very end of his career. But I think it's a testament to how good players we've seen in the evolution of baseball and how good these guys were in the dead ball era, throwing an inferior baseball and doing everything they possibly could and putting as much stuff on it, those pitches. And guys like Ty Cobb and Honus Wagner are hitting, high 300 batting average, 400 batting averages. It's insane.
And those records stood into our youth. I mean, think about what you're saying, right? Like, we were watching Nolan Ryan break dead ball era records. We were watching Randy Johnson break those records. I mean, these are things happening in the 90s and early 2000s. First of all, anybody that's out there listening that wonders how old, we could possibly be. I don't know how old you are, but like, I remember Nolan Ryan, Robin Ventura. I remember the fight.
Yep, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. And there's no doubt that you can watch it on YouTube right now. I mean, Robin Ventura gets his ass kicked. I mean,
what's the joke that Ventura's the only guy to get 6 hits off Nolan in one inning?
That's pretty good. Pedro Martinez, his fight, or whatever you want to call that, is pretty good. But anyway, we won't go into that one.
We'll get there, man. We got to keep it in dead ball because to get to the modern chat, we got to understand how baseball becomes what we loved.
Exactly. Cobb is credited with setting like 90 MLB records. I mean, that's how good he was. He had more batting titles than any other player. He played 24 years, predominantly for the Detroit Tigers, and then he went on and played for the Philadelphia Athletics too. An unbelievable player, career 366, I believe, batting average, over 4,000 hits. The guy's a monster, a monster.
And before we get into him being a villain, I want to shout out to you. Back in our Vicksburg episode, a little random history bit I've dropped several times since we recorded with you. No individual made more money singularly off this brand than Tyrus Cobb. How crazy is that? If you like Coca-Cola, so did Ty Cobb. He made a lot of money off of it.
It was an early Georgia company, and he made investments in Coke and, believe it or not, also General Motors. And so there's his Detroit thing. But yeah, like he saw the value in Coca-Cola as a product from his home state of Georgia, and he also saw the value in General Motors and automobiles and a variety of different things like that. But I think that Cobb, I think the thing that I like about Honus Wagner is that German American, he once again ties in immigrants getting opportunities in this country. Baseball that is baseball. And we're talking from the origins of baseball in this nation, Civil War, post-Civil War. Baseball created opportunity. Actually created opportunity for indigenous people. It created opportunities for African-American people, short as it was. There were still some indigenous players pitching and playing in the dead ball era. But immigrants found opportunities in baseball and became stars. And Honus Wagner is one of those. And then you got the native Georgian, who players thought was such a overly competitive individual that they sort of sensationalized who he was, and created certain stories and things like that. But others defended him. Other dead ball era players said all that stuff is hogwash and the things and what. So. But let's just say born in 1886 in small town Georgia.
I was gonna say let's get to that because his reputation. He's a jerk, right? But you put a better, more professional word. Like he's the villain of this era, but not to everyone.
I'll be honest. Anybody likes baseball? I don't. I'm trying to think. Like if you don't like steroids or the gambling with Pete Rose or any of that other stuff, you can call them all villains. You can vilify anybody that you want to if that's your prerogative. But I would say, without a doubt, that Cobb and villain are synonymous throughout any decade of baseball, from the time that he played to the time that he died to today. People think that he is a villain, and that has followed him. His father. They lived in Royston, Georgia. I think his father was a judge or a lawyer. The biggest thing was that he idolized his father, but he had a fascination with baseball, And the big thing was he started playing in the local leagues, and eventually he gets his opportunity. He gets a contract with the Detroit Tigers in 1905. And the thing that happens is that at the time period that he gets called up, he is a rookie and he is a kid. He is 19 years old. So let's not attribute, old man Cobb. He is a kid. And his mother fatally shoots his father, kills him.
Jesus.
He finds
Wow.
out he idolized his father like we idolize any one of our parents, that we love, or grandparents, or anybody that's been important in our lives that's been in a parental role. He idolized his father. He finds out that his father's been shot dead. His mother is arrested and brought to court. All of which while he's away playing baseball, and this insane tragedy happens. His mother's in jail, his father's dead, and he's got to figure out how to be a professional baseball player around guys that have been playing the game for several years and that are significantly rousing him as you do to rookies. And he starts to bottle himself up, and he starts to become incredibly competitive. Now, his mother is not charged. The case effectively is thrown out. His mother claimed that she thought that her husband was an intruder, and she took barrels of a shotgun and killed him while he was climbing through a window. What most people think, and what has been written, is that Cobb's mother was having an affair, and that potentially her lover is the one that opened up the two barrels on her father. He had said he was going out with apparent suspicions, was climbing through a window to catch them red-handed, and was killed. But I think Cobb attributed a lot of the ferocity or whatever on the base pass and his competitive nature, and the reason why he played the game the way he did. There's not a player during the Dead Ball era that didn't say that it was Cobb's game. That's how he looked at it. It was his game, and you were just playing it.
Does he go home to deal with that stuff, Andrew? He stays in Detroit the entire time?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I can't remember if he actually does go home. I think he does for the funeral and that whole part of it. But again, he has to very quickly turn around and go back and go to training camp and prepare for the 1906 season. I mean, it's hard, and so I think what he regretted, and I think we all have somebody in our life that didn't get us to see us do something that we would consider great or influential in our life. There's always something like, I wish this person was here and saw us, or wish they, and Cobb literally had that lingering over him. His father never got to watch him play baseball. He's arguably one of the, if not the greatest baseball player that ever played the game. His father never got to see him, and that's something that he carried forever.
That was his chip. I do have one more question for you before we continue with Cobb. Knowing that, we're still in the early 20th century, and our conversation started with the importance of Civil War veterans kind of moving this into the 20th century here. When I think of, Confederate units, I don't have to look very far in my own family. People in my family served in Cobb's Irish Legion. Is there any connection between the Civil War Cobb and the baseball player Cobb? Loosely, directly, do you know of any? Also Georgia regiments. I mean, that's
no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And oh man. I'm just trying to remember. Was it William R. Cobb? Who was killed at Fredericksburg? Cobb's father told him that they were related, and Cobb talked about that as one of the great heroes in the family that died. I think I remember looking at Cobb's Civil War lineage to find out if that was true. And I think that I found that Cobb did have a Confederate ancestor on his father's side, but had served in a North Carolina unit as a private. So Civil War touched the Cobb family. Yeah, I think it did. Whether it was, loyalty to the Confederacy and slavery, or was what who knows? I have no idea, but I can say that one of the reasons why Cobb is vilified is because he's Southern, and that's a fact. People looked at him as a ignorant, racist, violent individual, and there's a reason for that. And
he was a racist, violent individual.
That's exactly what he was. So they're book closed. I don't know why people writing books about this. No, Cobb.
Roll credits.
Right. Roll credits. Thanks, guys. Dead Bowl era is over. Cobb.
Oh my God, that was great.
No, the reality is for Cobb as the game ends, and he has set 90 records. He's played in all these different games. He's rivaled the great hitters, the Shoeless Joes and the Wagners, and he was an American League MVP, and he was a Triple Crown winner, for God's sakes. I mean, the guy is insane, and yet when the game ends for him, he's lauded as this hero amongst heroes. Him and Ruth and a variety of players that were coming out of this era, and I think the other thing I should mention that Cobb is also a veteran. He served in a military unit, homebound military unit, doing
chemical warfare.
Exactly, chemical warfare. I think he was a captain. He serves his country, takes time off from the game, comes back. I mean, he's doing a variety of different things. The Baseball Hall of Fame is created in 1936, and who's going to become on the first ballots? What names are going to be on there? And of course, Babe Ruth and Honus Wagner and Christy Mathewson, another one of the greatest pitchers of the dead ball era. Walter Johnson. Those are the names that are going to be the first to go in there. And of course, Cobb. And when all the voting is tallied up for the first guys to get into the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, again, the Abner Doubleday, they put the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, where the game was supposedly created. I think Cobb got overwhelming, like 220 out of 230 votes or something close to that. And he outdistanced every great player that people would say, no, Babe Ruth is the greatest, or Wagner. Cobb kills it. I mean,
but not unanimous, eh?
No, for sure not. No, absolutely.
Yeah. Do we know who those holdouts were? Were they people with personal vendettas against him, or were they?
I think that.
I guess obviously.
You can say today. That's a great question, Parker, because today we get mad when we see players that we know should get in and they don't.
Right.
And sometimes feels like a popularity contest. And now I'm not going to, I'm just a private citizen. I don't work for MLB, and I guess I can say these things, but I also don't want to trip and pretend that I'm an expert and not that I have a hard job doing that to put these individuals in. But sometimes as a fan, or we're very passionate about these things, and we want to see certain people that we feel get snubbed sometimes. And I think that some of that goes into that voting, and certainly that went against Cobb. He was not unanimous. In fact, I do know this, that he had the highest 98.2 or 3% voting to get in, highest ever. Nobody's ever going to surpass that to get into the Hall. Tom Seaver got higher than that with 98.8. So that tells you that still those things are being broken in the modern era for great baseball players. But that tells you how much Tom Seaver was revered in his own career. But
all I've learned in the last 30 seconds is that baseball voting has always been broken because somebody didn't vote for Ty Cobb and somebody did not vote for Ichiro.
Yeah.
Like, that is still chapping my ass that the current Hall of Fame cycle, Ichiro Suzuki was not a Hall.
It's nuts.
It's the same people though that didn't vote for Cobb. Like, somebody just doesn't watch baseball and has a vote.
Yeah, or they have the controlling interest in the Pittsburgh Pirates.
It's the owner of Pepsi. It's the owner of Pepsi didn't vote for him.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It had to be a Pepsi guy or a Dodge guy.
Dr.
You know,
Pepper
like
final vote in the 1936, and Dr. Pepper didn't like Ty Cobb, so he decided that he was going to go for that's who it was.
Said
It was
three
Dr.
strikes, get out of here, Cobby.
that's it. That's it.
So the reality of Cobb's myth and who he is, nobody really knew who Cobb was. Things were written about him from the time period that he played up until Al Stump wrote a autobiography with Cobb, and they sat down together and they wrote it out. And Cobb read it as he was dying. He gets in 59. Cobb gets prostate cancer and Bright's disease, and he's dying. And he'd been working with Stump to put together and edit this definitive autobiographical book on Cobb's life. And Cobb hated it. I think he tried to sue because he was like, "This is true," or "This is embellished," etc. And then he dies. And Stump decides to, I believe, sell first the story to a magazine, ironically called Truth, I believe, but then writes the book and puts it out. And that is the book that every single baseball enthusiast read about Cobb, because that was the definitive autobiographical book on him. And it basically paints him as a very violent, very racist, womanizing drunk with no friends, that was so competitive that he sharpened his spikes to hurt people, and he physically abused people on the base paths and all of these things. And that propelled the myth of Ty Cobb into what people thought about him to today.
I mean, you're not kidding, because I have this book on my shelf. I have read this book, and I remember as a young man growing up being like, this dude was a complete bag of shit. Like, like, why did he even get to play in the game? It's a kills piece. Like, it's a murder of Ty Cobb.
It's a hit piece, and they immediately were like, this is BS. This is not true. Most of these stories are complete fabrications, never happened, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the stuff, like the racist stuff, I didn't know Ty Cobb. He probably said the N-word. I mean, let's face it. There's no doubt about that. But what Charlie Learson wrote a biography, and he threw everything out the window, and he started digging to find out that Cobb was an incredibly passionate person, gave a lot of his fortune to build hospitals and give back to different communities. He was a strong proponent of the Negro Leagues and assimilating African Americans into baseball. Strong proponent of it. Of course, he dies in 1959.
Yeah, he gets to see Jackie and Roy and a lot of those guys come over.
Right, exactly. Now he dies in 61. So he does get to see the integration of baseball, which again, he was a huge proponent of that. But at the same time, nobody knew any of that stuff, because that was personal to him. He spent his money and he did the things that he wanted to do, but he was also very private. So the Stump book, has him shooting guns out windows and
wow.
Finagling nurses and, making people do insane things for money. And it's just preposterous. And the sad part is, I love Tommy Lee Jones, and he made the Cobb movie, I think in 94. And I remember being a kid and be like, I can't wait to see somebody made a movie about Ty Cobb. And it's just like, you watch that movie, and if you read Al Stump's book and you watch the movie, you're like, yeah, I mean, he was exactly what you said, Pat. It was just like, wow.
The biggest thing that I can't stand about that movie is, and I think I connected the dots only in the last 2 years, was I love Westerns, right? Like, Westerns are probably my favorite genre of film just out there. And so, every once in a while I come back to the Lonesome Dove epic, and Tommy Lee Jones plays whatever his name, Woodrow Call, and he's got this really, I don't even know how to describe it. It's the driest acting you've ever seen a human being do. And he does that to Ty Cobb. He turns him into this dry, crotchety asshole. And look, man, like you said, right? There's probably truth in the caricature that Stump makes of him, right? He's probably a man of his time, as I hate when people say those things. But but like he really leaned into that stump version of Cobb, and then let's say you don't grow up a reader and you grow up on baseball through film, like a lot of our friends do, because that's the era we grow up in, and like maybe you don't read Stump's book, but the movie does Stump's work for him.
Right.
Yeah,
it's true.
One thing I wanted to ask you really quick as we move forward is, thinking about how our conversation started today, a lot happens very fast. Talked about 1905. This game is the being attached to the American nationalism, things that are going on. It's 9 years until we're engaged as a world in World War I. Only 2.5 more years will go by until America's directly involved in that war. There's so much change. There's so much there's a lot that happens in this moment in time that's not even baseball related. And we mentioned Ty Cobb's service and things like that. Are we ready to move past Cobb? I mean, I could talk about Ty Cobb all day, but like how does World War I affect dead ball, affect the game? How does it take us from, these drunks, these Harvard grads, all these types of guys to like, these are the sons of us who are going to be soldiers and ball players, and then I guess moving eventually towards the greatest scandal of this era, things like that. Like, how does this moment all happen in like 10 years?
Yeah. The game continues to develop. The players continue to, again, rise as new stars. Smokey Joe Wood. I'm just trying, but one of the unknowns. I mean, this is where we'll tie into the early teens and kind of go to the World War I, the Great War, is Babe Ruth. I mean, George Herman Ruth. Who is literally considered the greatest player of all time, right? Or one of them. And is Eddie, you ask him, who's Babe Ruth? And
the Salt and the SWAT.
He was the Salt. He was the Colossus of Cloud.
That's right, the King of Crash.
That's right. And what team did he play for? The Yankees. Even if you don't know what city that is, they'd be like, yeah, he played for the Yankees. Like, yeah. But you know this, and many others know this, that he cut his teeth playing as a pitcher, and so his
Boston
is one living in a very poor section of Baltimore, Maryland. I think he's born in like 1895, and his ancestry is, I think, German. I mean, Ruth to me is German, so I'm just going to put that one out there. And
I'm glad you mentioned his Baltimore roots, because I have a friend who is very close to me professionally, that if we do not acknowledge that Babe Ruth is a Baltimore product, he will somehow teleport into this episode and murder me.
No, minor league Baltimore Orioles and the International League, like that's who he is. And I think there was significant interest in Ruth as a pitcher, because that's what he was, and he was a very good one. He really starts to cut his. I mean, I think he bounces around, but he really starts to cut his teeth with the Boston Red Sox. I mean, that's who he in 1914 he arrives in Boston and immediately makes a name for himself. I mean, first, you think about this, and there's many players that do this too, but he gets called up, gets to start playing, and basically, I think gets to play in the World Series.
I was going to say, wins a World Series like immediately.
I mean, boom. So how often does that happen, right? I think that's a testament to how good Ruth was as a pitcher, and he wins then. I think, did they win in 15 too? Gosh, again, I should have probably prepped more for Ruth, but and all the Boston fans listening are probably going to just throw me under the bus, but I know they win in
They know whose show this is anyway, dude. Don't sweat it.
That's true. I know that.
Well, I'm from Maine, and therefore I automatically, like, by birthright, I have to root for the Red Sox.
Right.
Even though I'm here in Washington now, and I'm technically a Nats fan.
Yeah.
So as the resident Red Sox guy, I can give you a pass officially.
I
There you
appreciate
go.
that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I will say this: Fenway Park was open the same day as Briggs Stadium, Tiger Stadium. You know, Tiger Stadium doesn't exist anymore. Fenway still does. It's a cathedral. We love our original baseball stadiums, and Fenway Park has an aura. That's why seeing Tim Kirkjian in Fenway, when I walk in, I mean, there was nobody there yet, and I walk in and I got my Maglio Ordonez jersey on. And
wow, what a name pull, Maglio Ordonez.
And like, yeah, this is so fun. I was actually living in Boston at the time period. I was living in Brighton, Mass, right off of Com Ave, and I was so excited. And Tim's there, and I'm like, this is a great day. And you're eating hot dogs and you're drinking beer, and I'm sitting right by the left field short porch there, and I'm excited. And I stood up. Verlander pitched that game, I think against John Lackey, or I can't remember now if it. And they immediately tagged Verlander for like 6 runs. Within 2 innings, I was like, what the hell? And so I didn't care. I was like, it's a game. I'll just sit and watch it. The Red Sox fans are happy, and that's a good thing. And
yeah, they're less violent. They're less violent and less racist when they're happy.
Yeah, it's true. And Austin Jackson comes up. He hits a solo shot right to us. It was like maybe 15 feet away from me. I was like, yeah! I stood up and I was clapping. And the aisle usher came up and he's like, hey, you need to sit down and calm down. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, you need to calm down now. It's like, okay. Like, I was like, I sit down and I look at my buddy, and I didn't realize this. I should have realized this, but my buddy had a 1986 Mets shirt on, and that's not a good year for the Boston Red Sox for our listeners. So I look over to him and I say, that guy's a real burp. And the usher comes back. He goes, I heard that, and you're out of here. And I got kicked out in the 6th inning of the only time I've ever been to Fenway Park.
Dude, they're so sensitive. They're so sensitive about Billy Buckner.
We were losing anyway. I didn't care. I shouldn't have said what I said, but the best part about it was like a Cheers moment for the show Cheers. On Yawkey Way, plug for that because they were with the Tigers before the Red Sox. But anyway, Yawkey Way, you cross it. There's all these bars. You walk in, they're dead. They're desolate. There's nobody there. Everybody's in the game. I walk in, and the bartender's like wiping a beer mug. Swear to God. He was like wiping a mug. He's like, you got kicked out, huh? Swear to God. I was like, yeah. He goes, I'll buy you a shot and a beer.
You are invited on the show anytime you want. You got tossed from Fenway. You're my hero.
Yeah, I was like, this is okay. I just called my buddies like, hey, this is where I'm at. Come get me. The bartender's, he feels bad for me because I got kicked out. So anyway.
That's great.
Ruth's career as a pitcher for the Red Sox may not be well known, but he was just really, really good. But when we talk about the worst trades of baseball or the defining changes or moments or whatever, is that the Red Sox were a winning franchise, but their owner decided that he wanted to offload some players that would give him money because I think he was in debt. I can't remember if he was.
I know this story very well because especially if you tie it to contemporary sports history, there was an NBA trade that just happened the week we're recording this that has been compared to literally 2 other trades in sports history, one of which was the Gretzky trade and then this one, which we cannot actually call it a trade. The Yankees purchased Babe Ruth, but
even I know that.
The owner of the Red Sox is in my best understanding at the time, he's one of those guys who just happens to own the Red Sox. It's not like that's his business focus. And his business focus is running theater productions. And he's got one production in particular that is bombing. He's looking for money, and the Red Sox roster can be offloaded as a way to make hard cash. And so the Yankees come buying.
Absolutely.
And this is the beginning of the dun dun dun. The creepy music. The curves.
Yes,
Where the curse comes
the
from.
curse. I think his name was Harry Frazee. Harry Frazee, by the way, doesn't just offload Ruth. Here's the other thing, that basically the Red Sox organization that won these World Series, many of those players go to the Yankees and end up helping them start winning World Series as well.
Right.
Just like, you're absolutely right, Pat. He's just like,
The dead ball era Yankees are not the Yankees that people have grown to know and love or hate. This is a team that was the Highlanders. So this was a team that didn't exist. Then they were the Highlanders and then became the Yankees. I also we talked about, the age of Fenway and the fact that Fenway is still out there. And one of the things, and this is going to be a shout out real quick for Parker here. One of my favorite things to do when I talk about connecting people through time is Fenway Stadium was opened before Titanic sank.
yes.
Right, just put it like that's where we're at on the map. Is like we've been talking about an era of baseball that is occurring both before, during, and after the Titanic tragedy, which we have focused on immensely here on this show. Which I'll ask you, even if you got nothing for me, do you have anything that connects Dead Ball to Titanic? Does the game stop when that happens? Is it like, oh my God, this tragedy?
I got nothing. The only thing I think of when my girlfriend's daughter has an obsession with Titanic, so we watch the movie a lot, and we're actually going to go to Pigeon Forge to the Titanic Museum this weekend.
Nice.
But the thing that I think of in the Titanic, my great-grandfather was born in January 12, and he would tell me every time, he'd be like, how I always remember the year I was born? I was like, because it's your birthday. He'd be like, no, because the Titanic sank the same year.
Yeah.
Everybody reminded me that you were born the year the Titanic sank. So we're pre-radio, pre-TV, pre all this stuff. And how were you remembered for the years and months what was the defining moment that you were remembered? We now go on Facebook to be like, what song was popular the month you were born? That's what they were doing. To be like, oh yeah, in 1917 this happened, in 1912 this happened, and it's always tickles me to be like, let's watch Titanic. I get the great grandfather to be like,
you are going to love the Pigeon Forge Museum, and it is a fantastic. I've been there 3 times now.
Awesome.
Every time they seem to have new stuff.
Cool.
It's a fantastic experience, and when you drive up, you're actually driving up to it's only like the bow section of the ship,
right?
But that's I believe that's 50%. Like I think it's like a 1/2 scale model of the bow of the ship, and it's huge. And you just kind of see it looming over Pigeon Forge when you come around the corner there, and you're driving down the strip, and you see it, and you're like,
someday we will talk about how the mountains of Tennessee was like, you know what we got to do. Yeah. We'll come to that.
You're going to have a Hatfield McCoy dinner show. We're going to have a Titanic museum. We're going to have an upside down house with King Kong climbing on it.
That's right.
I mean, I don't know what was going on in Pigeon Forge one day, but they were like, look, it's going to be great.
I mean, why not?
True. Andrew, so we have Babe Ruth in the conversation now, and this is my personal dead ball guy I like to talk about because there were very few things that I could do in baseball I felt incredibly well myself as a player. But one of those things was I hit home runs. And there is no one more associated with the long ball than perhaps Babe Ruth. I mean, even though his records have all been broken, he is still discussed in that GOAT conversation. What is it about Babe Ruth that changed this moment? So, I guess maybe not changed this moment, but what is it about Babe Ruth that changed the home run? Because we talked about homers. Yeah, we know dingers as those, out of the ballpark, out of the stadium sometimes kind of crushers, but most homers were these really fast, legged out inside the park, kind of vibes. Is he, even in Boston, because he's a two-way player in Boston, is he already making a name for himself with the long ball like we know? Or does that happen more once he goes to the Yankees? Like, when does the home run change in the dead ball?
Yeah, that is a good question. He was a good hitter for the Red Sox as well. but yeah, his name that doesn't change until he becomes a power hitter for the Yankees. When the game changes, and that's really the end of the dead ball era. So you go from 1900, where it starts to kind of fall into place. 1905, some of the stars are coming up. 1903, 1905. You get into the decades where it's becoming incredibly competitive between the Philadelphia Athletics and the New York Giants and the Detroit Tigers and the Pittsburgh Pirates, etc. But you start coming towards the tail end. The First World War, the Great World War, the Great War is wrapping up, and at the same time period, people are looking towards our national pastime is healing a nation. Once again, war has come, it's gone. Hundreds, what I'm trying to remember how many casualties was in the Great War, 190,000 or something like that, or just catastrophic loss of life, massive impacts, people reeling. Baseball is there to comfort them again, and you have this moment where people are excited. The season plays out, and you get to the World Series, and at this point, the team that everybody believed was going to dominate and win the World Series in 1919 was the Chicago White Sox. The White Sox had some of the best pitching. They had a phenomenal knuckleballer named Eddie Seacott, and they had Shoeless Joe Jackson, amongst a variety of other great hitters.
Who is arguably the best player in the game at that point.
Right, exactly. A left-handed hitter, phenomenal outfielder. Again, I think would be considered a five-tool player for his era. He was semi-literate and uneducated. He comes from that background of poverty. I don't want to say rags to riches, but he makes a name for himself in baseball. And so now again, you have these individuals that you can relate to as the common American, and they're going to the World Series and they feel that it's not even going to be much of a show. And then things kind of start to unravel very quickly. The standard of play that people expected as they start watching, we won't get into the semantics of it yet, but they start watching the players and the pitchers, and things kind of go awry pretty quickly.
A lot of money has come into the game. We've spent a lot of time in this chat talking about the growth and the popularity. One thing we haven't mentioned is money has been just like a magnet flying into this game. We've had stars. This game has expanded into cities, new markets. We're pulling kids off of farms of obscurity and making them stars. We were talking about Shoeless Joe as an everyman's star. I don't think it's on display in the podcast studio right now, but one of my favorite things I have is an original advertisement for Selz shoes, SELZ, and the advertisement is Shoeless Joe Jackson, and it says he doesn't always wear them, but when he does, he wears Selz. It's like I have like an original Shoeless Joe advertisement. But like money is coming in, and when you have the intersection of money and this overwhelming nationalism and this need to heal because we've just gone through the trauma of the Great War, controversy can come in. We did set the stage for this. This is that Wild West era where you can file a baseball, you can spit on it, you can wipe your ass sweat on it to make sure the ball breaks at some ungodly velocity, right? Like you could do whatever you want. Eddie Seacott, one of the first things I learned about the dead ball era through the 8 Men Out movie is Eddie Seacott throws like 33 innings in 48 hours. This is like when dudes just played the game differently, and now all this money is there, and there's also opportunities to do the dark arts, and that's, I think, where we're moving to is this conversation.
Right. So people started getting paid, but there were several owners that were notorious cheapskates, and I think Charles Kaminsky could be rated as the cheapskate owner of any baseball franchise at the time period. He grossly underpaid players. When players came to ask for bonuses and raises, he'd release them. I mean, great players really openly release them, let them go, try the open market, get picked up by another team, and they would. It's stupid stuff. He just was a cheapskate. And players their morale, and they were very disaffected. And so the several players, I think Chick Gando being the main culprit, he actually talks to a bookie. They start to discuss about the upcoming World Series against the Cincinnati Reds and throwing it and making a lot of money, $100,000 or $80,000 or something like that. And the collusion starts to set in. Everybody's disenfranchised about this. Yeah, they're going to the World Series. Everybody think, hey, that's what it's all about, right? But people also believe that there's value in the efforts that they're putting into this game. And so, the conspiracy is created. 8 men go into this conspiracy looking to, in a very smart way, throw the game.
Now, when we say throw the game, for our audience who has no clue what we're talking about, say it in plain English. What do we mean by that, Andrew?
That means that you knowingly are going to play bad. You will not give it your all. So these pitchers will not throw as hard as they can, or they will not make their pitches break like they normally do. And they'll effectively be putting the ball directly over the plate to great hitters. And great hitters are looking for easy pitches. Hitting a baseball is one of the hardest things you can do, bar none, except for Pat, who hits home runs apparently. But
I got to like for the context in which I play it, I could hit dingers. But let's be very real. In fact, because Tim Kirchin says it, if you were listening, he says there is nobody that he knows personally other than the major leaguers who could do it. He literally goes, Pat, you can't do it. Parker, you can't do it. He goes, I can't do it. Jeff, his son, who was on the episode, he goes, he can't do it. If you were on that episode, he'd look at you and he'd go, Andrew, you can't do it.
Good. Be an honor. I know I can't do it. I did baseball. I was just talking to my girlfriend about, I went to baseball camp 3 summers. My mother paid for that. And I was a good shortstop. I like to play outfield. I really was a good defensive player, but I couldn't hit the ball at all, and it drove me crazy. And I told her, I can tell you out of 3 summers doing that, I could count on my hand how many good hits I had.
Here's my baseball legacy right here. I hit a fair amount of homers, but this ball is so special to me. I hit a 3-run shot off my childhood best friend to move us out of RBBA first round playoffs. I kept this. This was a walk-off mash. This baseball is gotta be coming up on 30 years old at this point. So like when I was hitting dingers, I was like, we're talking like Pee-wee to like JUCO ball max.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, like it's not like I was out there playing D1 hitting Vandy dingers, things like that. But, just want to put it in context because the bigger the show gets, the more people are deciding to crap on me. And somebody's going to be like, oh, yeah, Pat said you could hit homers. I could when I was like 14.
Right. There you go. So the World Series is in the fix. The players start to throw the first game. It's starting to get obvious. They start throwing the second game. People are starting to pick up on it. They're very confused on these players that normally were incredibly dominant are no longer so. There's conjecture on if Shoeless Joe took the money or not. I think now they've said that he did take the money, but he didn't understand, et cetera. All that stuff. All to say that at the end, the Cincinnati Reds win the World Series. I'm trying to remember who the New York gangster, Arthur Rothstein, helped fix the game. He was a New York gangster. But people have their suspicions, right? But they go into the 1920 season and people are starting to figure out kind of what's going on. And eventually people start talking and admitting the money never came in. That was the whole thing. I think halfway through the series, they recognized they weren't going to get like the $100,000, and they're going to get like $5,000 or something insane like that.
Wow.
We're going to play.
The players are like, wait, what do you mean? And then they try to win the World Series.
Right. And then they try to win, but they can't, and it's pretty much it. But a grand jury decides to try the 8 men for conspiracy to defraud the American people in baseball. They're put on trial, and the witnesses are all, put forth. Some of the gangsters and bookies that were involved are brought for testimony. One of my favorite, this again, it's a Civil War thing, but one of my favorite individuals in history, just in general, and of course they just happen to be linked to baseball, is Kennesaw Mountain Landis.
The first commissioner. Let's go.
Dude, he was a judge, and like a fire and brimstone judge. Now he's the commissioner. Landis's father, Abraham, had been a surgeon in the 35th Ohio, captured at Chickamauga. He gets out of Libby prison. He returns to his regiment, and he participates in the Atlanta campaign. And at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, he was wounded by a piece of a shell, and that basically disabled him to the point where he had to be discharged from the service. And so when he came home, he named one of his sons in honor of the battle where he was wounded.
I was going to say, that was my introduction to that was even a battle, was learning that Kennesaw Mountain's weird-ass name was a Civil War fight as a young kid.
Yeah, and his father, and it makes sense. I mean, his father was there, wounded there, direct ties, served as a surgeon in the Union Army. So it all makes sense. And because of, basically, this commissioner is cleaning baseball up. No more of this gangster influence, no more taking bribes, no more drunkenness and lewdness. This is a game of professionalism, and it was his, mission to make sure that baseball changed. So Pat, when you said talk about Ruth and home runs and et cetera, it's like Kennesaw Mountain Landis is one of the first things that initiates the change from the dead ball era into the modern era of baseball. The prosecuting these offenders, kicking them out of baseball forever.
Yeah, permanent bans.
It's banned forever.
Still standing, right? Like they're still permanently banned today.
They're banned. Pete Rose is the modern figure that we could say is controversial. And
hey, I want to say something very clearly to you and on the record. When we were talking about Galarraga earlier, Rob Manfred, I believe, was already commissioner at the time. And I said, listen, man, there is absolutely somebody who can fix this. And there are two things that Rob Manfred needed to fix post-haste and still on the table can do the work. But he needed to let Pete Rose in regardless of Pete Rose, because Charlie Hustle should be in the Hall of Fame as a player no matter how we talk about this. And two, he should, as a commissioner, be able to, man, if there should be an asterisk on anything, Armando Galarraga gets a perfect game with an asterisk that says Jim Joyce blew this call, and Rob Manfred could and should do something about that.
I agree. Like I said, people are human, and that's part of the game that we appreciate, but man, that was. But
Kennesaw.
Tragic.
So going back to what we're talking about, though, but so Kennesaw is really ushering in this moment, and I like the way you're describing this, because this is where the old boys club of everymans and the mechanics is ending. Kennesaw is like, this is a professional league. These are professional athletes. Like everything, the integrity of the game, the quote unquote integrity that we love. Like when we talk about guys like A-Rod juicing, right? And we say that they're offending the integrity of the game. This is the integrity. He's establishing it in the aftermath of this controversy that the White Sox, now known as the Black Sox, have brought to the league, right? So and he does it quick, because the 20 season is a very different season than the 1919 season, right?
So you have this scandal that really concludes 1920, 1921. This is over. The faith in baseball was tarnished, and that's really what Kennesaw Mountain Landis wanted to preserve. He was concerned that the American people's faith in the national pastime that had such a significant influence on the post-Civil War era of the United States. He was concerned about that, and that's why he makes it his mission to do this. But there's several things that we could point to that the game changes, and why the home run becomes what it becomes and changes the game of baseball. The first one, obviously, is George Herman Ruth, the great Bambino. He could not hit home runs. I mean, God help the infielder that had to hit, a rip through the infield from that guy. I mean, it just was a bullet. So by 1921, offenses started scoring 40% more home runs. I mean, so that's because stadiums got smaller and baseball started, entering the stands and things like that. So that has the long ball.
Did they change the composition of the ball, Andrew?
They absolutely did. So, but here's one of the myths.
Was Tom Brady there to deflate it? And some 1920s version of Tom Brady. Hey, Boston, I see you.
Version of Tom Brady, yeah. That let's think about that one, because I don't want to go into.
I know we're talking about football now, but
that's a whole nother very tough topic for me.
Yeah, I know.
But that being said, the baseball, people said, in the 20s, a new baseball was livelier. It was more modern. It wasn't like the dead ball that could, that's the reason why more home run balls are hit. And that's not true, because that new ball with it, which went from having a rubber kind of core, turned into a cork-centered ball. And that new cork-centered ball, I believe, was issued in 1911. So we're talking new ball. So we went from this old ball into the 19-teens, and yet people are still playing a strategic game in the teens. So that's interesting. So yeah, why weren't people hitting more dingers? Because they were still playing a sophisticated, strategic, small ball game. That was how you played baseball. And those players, which came through that dead ball, old ball era, weren't going to change that. It's as they start to age out and the game starts to change that new cork ball does have an impact on how people are going to hit and the type of hits that are going to do that. One of the most important things that ends the dead ball era is the outlawing of pitchers manipulating the ball. I mean, that's just bottom line. These guys did anything, shine balls, emery balls, spit balls.
They got like cans of turpentine in the dugout. They're just keeping the ball in there.
They just, whatever they had, spitting on it, hawking a loogie.
They're playing fireball like Chandler and Matt were and friends.
Yeah. they did everything they possibly could do to get break on the ball. There's, I think, in Major League, I can't remember the actor's name, but he's talking to Charlie Sheen, and he's like, "What the hell is that crap on your arm?" And he's like, "I ain't got a fastball like you anymore, kid. I got to put every little thing I could possibly do to get some dive on it." And that's effectively what the dead ball guys were doing. They were taking out literally emery boards. They'd file the side off, and then they would throw their pitch, and it would dance all over the place. The thing that I think about, it seems ludicrous to us to think about a pitcher sitting out there and filing a ball the way they like it, but Joe Niekro was caught in 1987, literally doing that for the Twins, had a file and a piece of sandpaper in his pocket.
Really?
But he would manipulate the ball, and he was a knuckleball pitcher, so he had a nasty knuckleball.
Oh yeah.
He literally, they suspected, and they went up to him effectively to ask him what was in his pockets. And if you can watch, you go on YouTube after this, he throws out his pockets in disgust, and the emery board goes flying, and the sandpaper's on the ground, and the umps pick it up, and they toss him out, and it's like, dude, But
oh man,
we're still doing that stuff. They were throwing petroleum jelly and saliva and all types of stuff to get break on the ball.
I mean, that persists today, right? Like, what do we deal with? Yep. So first of all, without going into it, remember Garrett Cole was one of the first people to publicly complain about the need for this, because he's like, you're going to get somebody killed. But as a Yankee fan, we have one of the most infamous modern moments of this. Remember when Mike Pineda went out there with the pine tar right on his neck?
Yep, pine tar in his neck, or George Brent, getting caught in 85.
Oh, another Yankees thing, the pine tar bat incident. Yep, that's right.
So what exactly would pine tar do? Like I'm just trying to figure out the physics.
Grip.
Oh, I see. So it's okay. I get it now. Okay, that makes sense.
The real New York Yankees thing, and this is for Pat too, but this is at the same time period. was the death of Ray Chapman, who was played for the Cleveland Indians, and he was beamed in 1920 by one of these reckless pitches. I think Carl Mays was pitching for the Yankees. He threw a nasty pitch, and by manipulating the ball, I mean, these guys would take the ball and they would spit on it, they'd rubber dirt on it, and they would turn it into this like dirty, dark looking thing and then throw it at 95 miles an hour at your head.
It's just a projectile at that point.
Exactly right. And at this time period, they were still doing that, manipulating it any which way they could. And Mays threw a nasty pitch, and Chapman didn't see it, and it hit him square in the head. I also think that Mays was a submarine thrower, so his delivery wasn't conventionally like over the shoulder. He threw it kind of under and whipped it and up into the strike zone, and it was just a wild pitch that nailed Chapman. And you know, he fell and they stopped the game and they pulled him out and he went to the hospital and he died. And everybody on the Indians wore black armbands to honor Chapman, and they dedicated the 1920 World Series championship, by the way, for the Cleveland Indians. For Dan Vermilio, if he's listening out there, he's a diehard Cleveland baseball fan. And so Ray Chapman's death changes what they're going to do with this ball. You can't manipulate the ball. Pitchers can't manipulate the ball. The ballpark dimensions change again from open fields or really deep stands to bringing that in and enabling these hitters to now hit balls into the stands, hence home runs, dingers, long balls. And that part of it right there is the death of dead ball. The old strategic way of playing, it ushers in between Judge Landis and professionalizing baseball and making them athletes and going that route, that there's a standard, a suit and tie, you present yourself a certain way. The pitchers couldn't, be out, in theory, couldn't be out late nights and debauchery. They can manipulate the ball. They couldn't do things. The way that Cobb played and the way he dominated the base pass, where he would steal for second, third, and home just by deceiving the pitcher, that's not going to really happen anymore per se. There are some really unique players. Rest in peace, Ricky Henderson, and we're starting to see De La Cruz now for the Reds kind of do some pretty insane things. But
that's what makes baseball great, is like baseball, right? It evolves, right? Like the game stays the same, but then players just find the new ways, both legitimately and illegitimately, to keep this spirit of the gamesmanship era of baseball going, right? Like, so-and-so doesn't have the arm like so-and-so. So, today in 2025, this episode is coming out as pitchers and catchers are reporting there are guys showing up to major league camps today, hiding stuff in gloves, putting stuff in the back pocket, putting that hair gel on extra thick, right? There's always going to be the kids game, right? It's fun. It should be fun. The change of the stadiums enabled people to see more of that. Fenway Park and Tiger Stadium in 1912, Yankee Stadium, any old stadium that was starting to be crafted for this style of play, whether they knew it or not. And in 1912, even with the ball change, they didn't necessarily totally know what it would become. But I mean, what's better than watching a home run go over the green monster? I mean, Red Sox fan or not, you see that, you're like, damn. Yeah. Monster shot.
San Fran, when they're hitting baseballs into the Bay, San Francisco Bay, you're like, dude, that's so awesome. Wrigley Field.
That's one of the things Timmy Kirkchin pointed out, that, when we were asking him what he loves about baseball, is he's like, the game is the game, but outside of the infield, the field is different stadium to stadium. Like, you get your diamond is your diamond, and then past the diamond, there could be a pole out there. There could be a wall. Yeah. We made fun of the Orioles that every year they decide to change what their stadium looks like. Left field changes yearly in Camden Yards.
Hey, why not? it makes it fun. It makes it interesting. It makes it challenging. Those are all things that we want to see, and any one of them can impact the game in a good or negative way. But I think that the game itself has to always evolve. And, people have made arguments, especially over the past probably 30 years now. It's like, baseball's not the national pastime. Football's become the national pastime for Americans, et cetera. And then I go to a ball game. We went up to the Cincinnati Reds Cubs game last year, and dude, packed. Packed with Cubs fans, packed with Reds fans. You couldn't get a seat. Eating hot dogs, marking scorecards.
I'll tell you what, man.
Old men, old women, young kids,
right.
grandfathers, grandsons. It keeps going.
Right. I have never look, and I'm an NFL guy, right? Like everybody knows I root for the very, very painful experience of the New York Football Giants, but there is nothing like baseball even today, because no matter how popular football gets, nobody has ever been pulled out of school for a quote unquote doctor's appointment by their parents, wink, wink, like my parents, so I could go to opening day. Right? Like that is like, it's like one of those like acceptable rites of passage, even to this day, is like people connect to it because it's the game. Here's what I'll succinctly say before I hand it to you to sort of wrap things down: is the game that we grew up with, Andrew, is our game. But the game still looks like our parents' game, still looks like their parents' game. And every version of that game has something very, very unique to them, but yet still is exactly transferable from generation to generation to generation and on down. Like we can go all the way back to a Civil War soldier, and it's 90 feet to first, right? 60 feet, 6 inches between plate and mound, 3 strikes, 4 balls. Like these are things like I love that you could take a Civil War soldier, you could sit him down with a World War I soldier. And I do want to point out one of the craziest places I have found baseball was in World War I Canadian Scottish descendant soldier camps. Like the 85th Nova Scotia Highlanders is a unit that I study quite intimately. These guys play baseball. Like it is like the thing they do in camp. It's like you would think with all this heritage that they're still feeling from Europe, they're still basically Scottish. They love baseball. So you could take a guy from that era. You could take a guy that fought in Doubleday's unit. You could sit him down with you and me, all three of us, on Dollar Dogs somewhere in the New York Penn League, right? And we'll all get the game within 90 seconds of each other. We know what's happening.
Yep, absolutely. A great way to succinctly put that. The dead ball era of baseball is the game that you're referring to. Any game that we would watch, we could identify it as baseball, but it's the end of the dead ball era that we collectively can relate. Every single generation can remember and hone in on particular moments, players, times, events, and things that had an amazing impact on themselves, their families growing up. But the dead ball era was not. It wasn't just about rule changes, which did happen and did create the modern game. It forced a complete reevaluation of strategy, player value. I mean, right?
Sure.
The 1919 Black Sox scandal is literally about guys that were like, dude, you don't pay us enough and we're freaking making you money and we're real good and we're about to win the World Series and you won't even give us a raise or a bonus or anything like that. So player, value changes, and you have Ruth acquired over an exorbitant amount of money at that time period. But think about what Ruth did for the Yankees franchise, not just in monetary gain over forever, because they're still making money off of Ruth, but just at that time period and a change of the game. It's insane, his value in general, and the stadium design. Mentioning the Orioles Park, but really just in general, when the stadiums change, the game changes. And those that adapted to that, like the Yankees did with Ruth, this long ball with Gehrig and Ruth and Murder's Row and the domination of the 1920s and 30s and continuing on to teams like John McGraw or Cobb and small ball teams and the strategies that they considered the essence of baseball were considered dinosaurs eventually, and then in their own right were then viewed years later as the greatest ones that ever played the game. And many of the concepts that they considered essential were as valuable as the long ball. And that's the modern game. Every single piece of baseball has created what we watch and enjoy today. And you could say that every stolen base, whether it's Ricky Henderson or Ty Cobb, you're watching history when you watch that happen. Every player that steals a base, every person that swings through a breaking curve and strikes out, every home run that's walking off a game, every World Series, whether it's your team's or somebody else's, you watch history and it just seems like it goes on forever. There's not many things that we can point to say continue that don't fade out.
That's right.
There is nothing like riding on a pitch, Andrew.
Yeah, baseball's always been there. I'm sure there's more. There's more poetic things that can be said. James Earl Jones probably has the greatest, speech in Field of Dreams where he gives his whole thing about what baseball means to people, and it's still to this day very relevant. Rest in peace, James Earl Jones, because he's been in so many great movies that you can point to that have an impact on us, and he has these great moments. But that speech to me, when he really breaks it all down, and you watch the dead ball era players that are ghosts stop playing the game that they love, and the reason why they're there to listen to him pontificate on the greatness of what baseball means to Americans.
That might be the greatest statement ever, dude, is that a 35-year-old commentary on the game of baseball in a movie is still relevant to the history of the game of baseball today.
I mean, I remember going because my love of the game kind of like came really relatively recently, and because I'm 87 years old, and this is the span of my life, but my youngest son, he took a liking to the game, and so I was like, oh well, hey, I live right near Nat Stadium, let's go. I remember just walking in there for the first time, and I was just like, wow. And I just remember seeing that field laid out, and then I looked down at him and his face, that just that wonder. And the people there, I'll tell you, like you said this earlier, and it's so true. Men, women, children of all ages, everyone together, absolutely just fellowshipping, for lack of a better term, just enjoying it. As a person who knew nothing almost about it, I mean, I joke about it, was baseball the round one?
Right.
But as a person who, again, coming to it kind of late, I remember just walking in there and being like, wow, there's nothing like this.
Right.
There's nothing like it.
It's a majesty.
It is. There's something about it, and it sounds
beautiful.
It sounds like to somebody else, it sounds like you're being hyperbolic, but there's just something about it that just brings people together, and it's just it definitely is. I still think it is a national pastime.
Dead ball creates this magic, I think, is what I'm taking away from this conversation, Andrew, is that this roughly 20-year period of time is really when the magic that hooked me, that's when it was really created, was this transition from club to professional team, from amateur to professional player, from the art of the game to the just brutality of the fastball, the long ball, the shift, even before they call it the shift, things like that. But that majesty, I mean, when I said it to you a minute ago, like there's nothing like riding a pitch. Like, I mean, aside from, my own personal World Series joys and sadnesses, like you could pick a random World Series that has nothing to do with my team, and I'm standing on my feet 1 out to go before so-and-so, they could be, and like I'm standing on my feet like, like I don't do that for football. I love football. Right. I don't do that for rugby. I love rugby. I don't do that. Baseball, pardon my language, fucks me up in February when pitchers and catchers report, and it does it to me in October, November. And there's no other equivalent to that anywhere in the sports sphere. 162 times a season, I could live and die that experience, right?
Absolutely.
And that's amazing, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I think wrapping it up though, but for people that like baseball, but I look at you, Parker, and you're like, I just got into this, and the feelings that you felt and that your son felt is what everybody feels. That's it. That's baseball. Like you don't have to be 5 years old to get it. You can be 45 or 105 to watch your first game and still feel the magic. It's there. You walk into the stadium, it's there. Everybody.
That's right.
When you're walking into a baseball stadium and everybody's cheering, and there's not to be like, whatever generation we're in now, but to feel the vibe. There is a vibe though. Like you walk in and it's humming. And you're like, this is something, I feel like, was this what Woodstock was like? Because this is but it's every stadium and every game that you go to. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're a fan. And I'm not a fan of the Cubs. I'm not a fan of the Reds. I went to the game with family that loves the Cubs, and we go in, and I'm just there for the game, man.
Dude, and it doesn't even matter if it's the majors anymore, because you could walk into a minor league game and feel this same electricity. I mean, we go watch the Frederick Keys play all the time, right? If I'm not a New York Yankees fan, I am a Frederick Keys fan. Those are my baseball teams. And you walk into Harry Grove Stadium in Frederick, which, used to be high A ball for the Orioles and now is like in this dream league, whatever, pseudo-affiliated, unaffiliated, but whatever. Dude, you walk in, and as soon as you see the grass, your hair stands up, and you're like, I am in a cathedral right now.
Sure. Well, and that's the thing, too. Like, the people, when they're there, like, I remember, like, people, like, they saw my son. He was, he's a kid, and they were like, wow, is this your first, did you have, how often do you come? And he's like, it's my first time. And they're like, whoa. And people were just so nice to him.
Yep.
And then they were nice to me. and this is Washington D.C. Finding people being nice to each other, to strangers. I'm not trying to poop on Washington D.C. I'm just saying, finding a room full of strangers who are actually nice to each other in any major city in the United States, I would dare say, is actually rare. But when you're here, and I'm going to steal this from Olive Garden. When you're here, you're family type of feeling. You know what I'm saying? Like.
I think what you're saying could be said, my best way of saying that would be the best versions of all sports fans are their baseball fans. Boston's best fans are its Red Sox fans. Philly's best fans are its Phillies fans. You get Eagles fans. You get Eagles fans, you go like this. Philly fans, you're like, all right.
Right. That's right. But no, it was this genuine desire. You could tell. And the people who we were talking to, like, there was a really nice kind of like older couple who were so nice. There was this really nice kind of younger group of people who were being really nice to him. And it would just, they were throwing stuff out, and people were like grabbing like the t-shirts or whatever and giving it to him. It was just that they wanted to share the joy of this sport. And awesome. I mean, honestly, just the feeling of being there was one of the things that just kind of won me over. There's nothing like seeing it live.
All right, Andrew, couple things I want to do to wind this one down. I want to say, first and foremost, thank you so much. Thank you for coming back and spending some time. I know the next time we're going to catch up with you is going to be in a way more familiar piece of ground to stand on, because we will be talking about Mill Springs and things like that. We will jump back into the Civil War, but it was absolutely incredible to take a break from the things we definitely know to talk about the things we definitely love and baseball. And I was really excited when that sort of became a possibility for us. So thank you for your time with that. 2, if you had any more commentary, I would toss it to you. And then 3, what are your prospects this year for the Tigers, and who do you think is going to win the World Series if not the Tigers?
Well, every year I say the same thing. Tigers are going to win the World Series. Yeah,
Okay.
that's just the bottom line. Their prospects look pretty good. They have a young team. They just acquired Jack Flaherty again on a 2-year contract. He can opt out after a year, but they got with Tariq Skubal, Cy Young winner. They're going to be good. They're going to be challenging. I think if they don't get a power hitter, like a third baseman or something like that to pick up, I think they're still going to struggle against the Cleveland Guardians. So we'll see how that goes. The only other commentary I had is this: the dead ball era is infinitely fascinating. For your listeners, get Lawrence Ritter's book, The Glory of Their Times. It's like $2. You can get it in a bargain bin. You can get it off Amazon, or not plugging Amazon, but anywhere literally. You can get it and just read the stories of the players, and it just clicks, and you're like, whoa, this time was the Wild West of baseball, and it ushered in the game that we know it, and you're hearing it from the individuals at the end of their life, and the only thing they wanted to do was share that moment. And there's nothing more baseball than that, sharing in the moment, and that's all they wanted to do. And that book will probably kick off an interest in getting any other books on baseball, from the Negro Leagues to the early inception, to Civil War baseball, to scandals, to you name it. I mean, it'll kick off any kind of passion for baseball. But Lawrence Ritter's book is something special out there, and we're really fortunate to have that one. But beyond that, the Dead Ball era has some of the most ludicrous characters. We didn't even get into many of them because we don't have enough time. But Rube Waddell and again, Wahoo Sam Crawford. I talked to him, but he's a Tiger. He's incredibly unique, and he has a very long part of Ritter's book to read. There's just so many people. Christy Mathewson that we didn't really talk about. We really didn't get into Walter Johnson. We talked a little bit. There's so many. Smokey Joe Wood has like one of the best seasons in 1915, and then blows his arm out. And then he converts with the Indians as an outfielder, and he still has a long career. There's not many people that have done that. All that to say that baseball is just an
evergreen. I think is where you were going with that. It's evergreen.
Yeah, evergreen.
Well, you know what I was hearing? I was hearing follow-up episode is all I was saying. But
there you go.
We're definitely going to be coming back to baseball. And Andrew, you are always invited to be a part of our baseball conversations. Unfortunately, brother, I don't think the Tigers are going to win the World Series. That being said, I also don't think my Yankees are going to win the World Series, because how do you beat the most disgusting thing in baseball, which right now is the Dodgers payroll?
Yeah, it's you can't. They're the Yankees of our day, man. I mean,
dude, it is the most disgusting thing ever. And I do want to put it on record for all of my favorite Yankee haters out there. It's been now 16 seasons since we've won a World Series. So what are you hating on? You're hating on old reputations. Yeah, let's not dwell on it, all right? It's been 16 seasons, which is a long time. But you want to talk about things that are special, right? Like, I have children now. My oldest is 6. One of the best memories I'll ever have is 10 years old was my dad waking me up so I could watch the final outs of the 1996 World Series. The Yankees hadn't won one since 78. So, my dad and I got to share that moment together, and there will come a time, hopefully in the next couple of years, where I wake up my daughter and I say, hey, this has been a long time. I want you to watch this with me. You'll remember it forever.
There will be, whether she's next year or 10 years, that will happen, and that's baseball.
I mean, I do start to worry about the Yankees right now. Like, I know nobody's going to cry for me, Argentina here, but dude,
41 years. It has to happen. It has to happen.
Look, I am rooting for you personally, Andrew Miller. I hope you feel the joy. Look, I don't know if you root for the Lions or not, but as a Giants fan, I did not want to see the Redskins Commanders, go on and do anything. But I did say to my wife, who is a Commanders fan, I did say your happiness would mean something to me here. I don't want this team to do anything, but so for you, Andrew, because you're such a cool dude, I hope they do win for you.
Thank you.
And your kids.
We'll see. Yeah.
Oh, my God. All right, guys. Well, look, if you're down in the Kentucky area, go find Andrew at his top secret government site, and you can catch up with a really cool Civil War historian in his own right. Also pick his brain about baseball in person because, like myself, he's just full of stories. And obviously, man, when we come back to this subject, we'll find a way to keep you in the conversation because we'll go from the dead ball probably into the World War II era because I think that's probably the next big thing I want to talk about baseball-wise, but maybe also we'll take a good look at the Negro Leagues because you cannot talk about the World War II era without the collision course of integration that baseball should have always been on. But and anyway, I digress. Baseball is a topic we said we were going to come to in many installments because of its vast history, and Timmy Kirkjian got us going with just why the game is great, and Andrew Miller has opened the door about why the game is magic. So for our guest today, Andrew Miller, for our co-host, Parker Russell, I'm Pat McGuire. This has been the History Things podcast talking dead ball baseball. We will catch you all later.
Bye, everyone.